Hello, and welcome to Applicata Biblia. My name is Mark. Thank you for stopping by for just a few moments as we get into God's Word. We are continuing in the series of Bibles in the Character, or a walk through the Bible, where we just simply are going to touch on the main characters of the Scriptures that God is dealing with, that reveals a lot of what we are supposed to know by the time Jesus comes and when he comes, and how he deals with his people and how the people deal with him. And we get a lot of insights and understanding from that, especially in the Old Testament, where we think, a lot of people think the Old Testament's not even necessary to be a Christian, and that's not true. That's a fallacy. It's very important to know your Old Testament and to know the history of Israel, because the history of Israel is the history of Jesus. Okay, so this text, I would suggest I'm not going to read it. I would suggest that you read them yourselves. This is Genesis chapters 25 through 27. Genesis chapters 25 through 27. It's a fairly short read. So up until now, we've seen Abraham, who's come onto the scene. We know that God gives Abraham these specific promises about his future and what's going to happen, that the world will be blessed through him. So he understands this, and that blessing becomes a big deal, because we're going to find out today why that's a big deal. We found out last week that he sent out he's very old, and he sends out his favorite and most trusted servant, along with some other people, to go find his son Isaac a wife. And he does, and it's a beautiful story. He goes and finds Rebekah for him. And so that was a great story of faith and God's providence, and that's typically what you find in most of these scriptures, are God's, God requiring faith from his people more than anything. He wants us to trust him. And we see God working throughout all of the scriptures, and today's is no different. So in chapter 25, and I'm just going to read from my notes real quick. In chapter 25, Abraham dies. He's buried with Sarah. Now, he has some other wives and some other children. These are basically concubines, because Sarah is the wife. And he ends up sending them away, and he gives everything to Isaac. Isaac inherits everything. And then Rebekah is barren for some time, like 20 years. Isaac prays to God that she would become pregnant. And so eventually she does. And come to find out, she's going to have twins, and she's realizing this, and she's kind of pondering, what's going on here? Why is this like this? And Jehovah God himself tells her, and this is very important to the story, he tells Rebekah, you have two nations inside of you, one will be greater than the other, and the older will serve the younger. So she has this information going into this. And so her time comes, and she bears these children, and the first son is born, and he's red and hairy, right? So his name is Esau. That name Esau just basically means red, or maybe it means red and hairy, but either way, it describes who he is. And as he's being born, the next child behind him has got him grabbed by the heel. So his name is Jacob, heel grabber, or also it means to usurp somebody's authority in a certain way, or to basically take something that belongs to him in that sense. So that happens, and they are both born. And Esau grows up to be this man's man sort of guy, and he loves to hunt, and he loves to get game, and bring it home. And his brother Jacob, on the other hand, now Jacob is a little different. Jacob is described as peaceful and as dwelling in tents. And what that means is he's a homebody, right? He doesn't do what his brother does necessarily. He prefers to just stay at home and take care of the things around the home. And because that's his job, and he's obviously very good at it. And so what we see here is, as the story progresses, it's stated that Isaac loves Esau and Rebekah loves Jacob. Now, it doesn't mean that they hated the other child. It just means they had a preference from one child to the other. And a lot of people like to read into that, you know, parents shouldn't do this, and parents shouldn't love one child more than the other, and they shouldn't, you know, show favoritism, and you need to be able to, you know, when you have children, to be just and upright before them and not be wishy-washy about things. Whatever you do for that kid, you do for that kid. And I agree with that. That's so true. That is absolutely true. You know, parents don't get necessarily an instruction manual. You know, we have the Bible and that helps us, but we don't have an official instruction manual for every child because every child is different. And I do think a lot of times parents sometimes get along with one child more than the other, and sometimes that happens, and I think that's normal. And I don't know how much of you know, these preferences were necessarily evil. I don't think there was any evil intent here, and I don't know that these parents were being unfair to any child here. But that could be noted, I suppose. And it's important that we show our own children, you know, no matter how many children we have, that we love each and every one of them equally, even though they're different, and sometimes we have to do that in a different manner for them. So anyway, so we see this kind of, it's not a rift, I'm not going to call it a rift, but we see the differences and the preferences of these parents with these children at this time. So what happens next? Well, Esau is out and he kills some game, and I'm assuming he kills game, and he comes back and he's tired and he's famished. He's just starving, right? He's so hungry, and he comes in and it just so happened at that time that Jacob was preparing some stew. It's like a bean soup, like lentil soup is what some versions call it. And he's making this meal, and you know, Esau's starving, and he goes, "Hey, give me some of that stew." And Jacob, and this is where we start seeing the character of these people. He's a very shrewd brother. He says to him, "Okay, I'll give you some stew. You give me your birthright for it." He's bartering with him. He's not stealing it. Okay, people say he steals it. He didn't steal it. He's bartering. And his brother says, "Yeah, okay, I mean, if I die from being hungry, I mean, that would be of no use. What use is having a birthright? So I'll do it." And so, so just to make sure, Jacob says, "Okay, you swear by that." And he makes him take an oath. And he gives him the stew and some bread, and he gives that to him to eat. So he takes his birthright. And essentially at that point, we see the character of both of these young men. Jacob, this shrewd kid who is going to get what he wants, however he can do it. And his brother Esau, who it is said of him that he despised his birthright. Now the birthright was what was coming due for the oldest son. The oldest son would get double portion of the inheritance. So in this case, he would get 2/3 of the inheritance. And then Jacob would have got 1/3. Well, now the tables are turned. And basically, he's described as despising it. In other words, he just didn't value it like he was supposed to. And he kind of gets, he gets knocked around in his character does for doing that. And I think it's there to signal this is the type of person he is at this time. But we also see Jacob is he's kind of flaky. Maybe not flaky, but this was not a nice thing to do, but he did do it. Okay, so in chapter 26, we see Isaac basically building up his wealth, and that's important to the story, right? Because if you're going to lose an inheritance, let's talk about how much you lose. Well, Isaac is getting very wealthy, and people like him. He becomes so strong. Some people send him away. And then they come back and they say, look, we know how strong you are. Just don't hurt us, okay? And and they make a deal with him, that kind of thing. So we see Isaac growing, and then we see Esau takes some wives from the Hittites, and they grieve his parents. His parents are not happy about it at all because there's probably a lot of religious differences. They probably have a lot of other issues with them that they don't like. And I'd say likely, at least for Isaac, it's probably has more to do with the idolatry that might be going on, because the Hittites were pretty bad about that stuff. Okay, so in chapter 27, Isaac calls Esau. He says, Esau, come here, I want to talk to you. Now, Isaac is very old, and he can barely even see. And he is, he calls his son and says, look, I'm going to die. I don't know when, but, it's going to be soon. And I want you to go out and kill me some game and make me some food and come back here, and I'll give you the blessing. Now, the blessing is essentially what the father would put onto the son and say, this is the son who's going to lead the family when I'm gone. He's going to get all the good things that I've been getting. He's going to take care of the family and do all the good things that I've been doing and all the things. And now also, since we've seen the Abraham promises from God being passed on to Isaac, he's actually passing those on to this son as well. So that's how important this blessing is. It's not just, some kind of flippant thing. It's a very important part of what was supposed to happen next, even though, he wouldn't get the double portion. He would at least be leading the family after his father dies. So that's a big deal. So what happens? Well, what happens next is really way out there and crazy and kooky, because kind of in the background, Rebekah overhears all of this happening. She overhears that the blessing is about to happen. She overhears that the blessing is about to happen. And she knows that Esau has gone out to get this food so that he can get the blessing. So what does she do? Well, she goes to Jacob and she says, look, your brother's going out to kill some game so that he can make some porridge for your dad and he can get the blessing. You need to get the blessing. So she tells him, go get some animals ready so I can make this stuff, and you're going to go in and you're going to get the blessing from your dad. And Jacob, as shrewd as he is, says, well, wait a minute now. If I go in there and he finds out that it's me and not Esau, I'm going to get a curse and not a blessing. I don't know. He's really doubtful about this plan. And she says, don't worry about it. The curse will be on me if anything happens. And he's like, he's hairy and, I'm smooth. And she goes, don't worry about it. You just put on some animal skins, animal hair on your arms and hands and whatever. And if he goes and touches you, then he'll know that you're actually Esau. So she's devised this plan to trick her husband into giving this blessing to Jacob. And it works. It really works. He goes in with this food, and Isaac is kind of doubting. He says, who's this? And he says, this is Esau, and I've got this food. And he goes, well, that was fast. And he says, you sound like Jacob. And he says, come closer. And he has Esau's clothes on, and he touches his skin. He smells him. He goes, oh, this is my son Esau. Yeah, he smells like the field, and he's all hairy and everything. So he's totally fooled. So he gives him the blessing. And basically the blessing is, you're going to move forward for the family. All the blessings that are coming to this family are going to be through you now. And that's a big deal. That's a really big deal for all the reasons I just stated. So what happens? Well, of course, Esau returns, and he goes to his dad, and he makes this stew. He makes his own stuff. He makes his own food for his dad. And of course, I'm thinking about Rebekah going. She's probably going, this is going to not be good. But she felt the need to do it. So he goes into his dad and says, I made you food. And he goes, who are you? And he goes, I'm Esau. And he goes, no, Esau was already here. And they go this back and forth, and they realize that that he was actually tricked into giving the blessing to Jacob. Well, at that point, Esau just breaks down. He weeps and he's crying and he's saying, haven't you got anything for me? Isn't there anything you've got? And he's like, no, I did it all for your brother. There's nothing left. And so he does speak some words to him, and it's not a curse, but he does talk about how at some point he will break the yoke of his brother. In other words, being yoked to him. And we will see that happen later. So all of these things happen for a reason. And of course, we look at it as humans, and a lot of times we want to criticize God. People want to criticize God all the time. Why would he let lying happen? And why would why would he let this happen? It's like, well, God isn't the one lying. This is just him letting people do whatever they're going to do. Just to finish chapter 27, God speaks to Jacob, and he reiterates the Abrahamic promises to him in chapter 28. It's very important to see that. When Jacob wakes up, he consecrates the spot, calls it Bethel, and he makes a vow to God. So that's very important. So there's a lot of different things that we see in this story. Esau also marries more women in the area just to spite his parents, apparently. So we see these things. This is just people being people. It's not for us to just stand back and judge them. They're just being people. Sometimes people are spiteful, and sometimes, like in the case of Rebekah, she was told something, and this is something that I wanted to bring out. There appears to be treachery here, but we have to remember that God has told Rebekah how things are going to work. And I really, I wonder if she just thinks she's going to help God along, if the whole time she's thinking, Isaac, I know how much you love that Esau, but he's not the guy. He's not the guy. Okay, the older's going to serve the younger, and I don't know if she was thinking that this is God's will, and so she did it. But the story kind of seems to frame it like, well, she just likes Jacob more. Maybe, because he hung around the house more or whatever. But I tend to believe that that part of the story where God tells her how things will work helps motivate her to do these things as well. So again, Jacob, and this is main part of the story. Jacob is that son of promise. Remember, last time I talked about Isaac. Isaac was that child of promise as well. Well, now we see this child, and God is choosing who's going to serve his purpose. And this all has to do with the lineage of Jesus. The lineage of Jesus is going to come through Jacob. Okay? He ends up having the 12 sons, and we're going to get into all that. 12 sons, the 12 tribes, and it's going to be through him that Jesus comes. That's why the story's in here. Plus all these other things that we learn about how God deals with people and how the character changes. And it's important to see when we read these things. I'm not covering that part. But the character of these people change as time goes by. At this point, Esau hates Jacob. And he's even saying things like, yeah, as soon as my parents die, I'm killing Jacob. He wants to kill him outright. And so Rebekah, when she hears that, she sends him away. And that's when God meets with him and gives Jacob, he reiterates the promises that he had given originally to Abraham. So just as a kind of an epilogue, Esau does become fairly rich. He becomes well off, and he does forgive his brother eventually, and we'll get to that part eventually. But first we got to get to the next story with Laban and all of that. And again, this all has to do with the coming of the Christ, and just gives us a little insight as to how God deals with people and how people deal with God, I suppose. Thank you so much for coming by and listening to this little story. It's going to get, there's going to be more intrigue coming up. And last week, I think I talked about Laban, and we got to be ready to look at Laban, and we're going to talk about him and how we see the tables are going to be flipped on this Jacob fellow. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you in the next one.